Avant de commencer, j'aimerais vous demander une petite faveur. Je fais de mon mieux pour atteindre l'objectif de 1000 abonnés, un chiffre qui représente énormément pour moi. S'il vous plaît, cliquez sur le bouton s'abonner. Ce n'est qu'un clic, mais pour moi, c'est une immense motivation pour continuer à créer des vidéos. Un grand merci à vous.
She didn't pause to ponder, nor to plead. When Abigail Reed saw that gleaming cane ascend over the head of a small, quivering boy, she bolted. She dashed across a room brimming with men who held the power to shatter her life with a single word, into a house where women of her standing were never meant to cast a shadow. She absorbed the blow intended for a child she barely knew. And in that one desperate instant, everything irrevocably shifted. If this tale resonates with you, please subscribe and follow Abigail's journey to its very end. Share your city in the comments below. I'm eager to discover how far this story will travel. The cane descended with chilling speed. Abigail Reed saw it before anyone else in that opulent, candlelit chamber. She noticed Silas Whitaker's arm lift, initially slow, almost languid, the way a man moves when he's utterly assured of his unstoppable intent. Then, the silver head of that cane sliced through the air as if it had an urgent destination. She was already in motion before her mind could grant permission. Her basket hit the floor, its contents, torn coats, half-mended gloves, 3 spools of dark thread, scattering across the polished oak. She didn't look back. She didn't recall the stringent rules, Missus Bell had made her recite on her very first morning at Hawthorne Hall. A hired woman does not touch a gentleman. A hired woman does not speak unless spoken to. A hired woman does not run. Abigail ran. She covered the distance in 4 strides and threw herself over the boy just as the blow landed. The sharp crack reverberated through her like a winter branch snapping. The pain struck her left side, a searing, expansive agony that stole her breath. And she heard a sound escape her lips, one she hadn't intended. A short, choked gasp, swallowed by the sudden, profound hush that descended upon every man in the room. The chamber had fallen utterly silent. Not the polite quiet of men momentarily halting their discourse. This was a stunned, breathless stillness, the kind that follows an inexplicable event, leaving observers at a loss for how to categorize or comprehend it. Silas Whitaker stood over her, cane still raised, his pristine white waistcoat now darkened by the boy's spilled wine. His face remained largely unchanged. That, Abigail realized with a shiver, was the most terrifying aspect, even in her pain. Silas Whitaker's face, up close, was still remarkably pleasant. "Well," he said, his voice hushed, the tone of a man carefully weighing his offense. "That was unexpected." Samuel pressed against Abigail's side, his small fingers clutched into the fabric of her working dress, trembling. He was 7 years old and smelled of candle wax and fear, his breath catching in that terrible, ragged rhythm she had come to recognize, the way it came when his lungs seemed to forget their purpose. "Easy," she whispered into his hair. "Easy now. Breathe with me. Real slow." He didn't. I didn't mean to." Samuel's voice fractured. "I know you didn't. Hush now. Just breathe. You," Silas declared, pointing the cane at her, "are now a servant in this house." "Yes, sir." Her voice remained level, her gaze fixed on the boy. "Then I suggest you remember your place." "My place right now," Abigail replied, still not meeting his eyes, "is between you and this child." She heard a sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind her. One of the other gentlemen, she presumed, or perhaps Mrs. Bell, who had materialized in the far doorway, wearing that peculiar expression of a woman watching a carriage hurtle towards a cliff edge, knowing she is powerless to intervene. Silas lowered the cane slowly. He smiled. It was a practiced smile, honed over years of dinner parties, courtrooms, and smoking lounges, the kind that revealed absolutely nothing of the thoughts churning beneath. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said, his smile shifting towards the doorway, "your household staff appears to be in need of some instruction in decorum." The room stirred, not with noise, but with a subtle shift. Every man in it moved, some stepping back, some straightening their posture, others freezing in a stillness that spoke of a sudden understanding that something larger than themselves had entered the vicinity. Nathaniel Hawthorne stood in the doorway. He hadn't been in the room when the incident occurred. He entered carrying the peculiar quiet of a man who has just received news from another part of the house that has propelled him forward with more urgency than he cared to display. He was tall, clad in a dark coat, and possessed a stillness that was not peace, but its antithesis, the unnerving calm of something poised to act but not yet decided. His eyes first found Samuel, then traveled to Abigail's back, where a thin, dark stain was seeping through the fabric of her dress, and finally alighted on Silas. He crossed the room with a measured gait. He halted when 4 feet separated him from Silas Whitaker, and he spoke without raising his voice by so much as a whisper. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "if you raise that cane again in this house, you will leave without the hand that holds it." Silas's smile didn't vanish, but it contorted, thinning, its edges becoming guarded. "Nathaniel, surely you can see the girl was out of. I can see my son on the floor and your cane in the air." Nathaniel's voice remained unchanged, utterly level. "I need to see nothing else. The wine was an accident. The boy simply needs to be." "I'll thank you, Nathaniel," Hawthorne interrupted, his tone unwavering, "not to tell me what my son needs." The silence in the room now held a palpable tension. Silas spread his hands, a performance of placid reason. "Of course. Of course. I meant no harm to the boy. It was merely reflex." He glanced down at Abigail, still crouched beside Samuel, and his voice dropped a half register. And as for the girl, she did step where she had no business stepping. Nathaniel's gaze shifted to Abigail then. Not to Silas. To her. It wasn't a gentle look. It was the look of a man taking an accurate, unvarnished measurement of something. She felt it as one feels a shift in the weather. Not seen, but undeniably known. "Can you stand?" he asked her. "Yes, sir." "Then stand." She did, slowly. She kept one hand on Samuel's shoulder, for the boy was still trembling, and because she herself needed an anchor, though she would never admit it. "What is your name?" Nathaniel inquired. "Abigail Reed, sir. I'm the seamstress. Mrs. Bell engaged me 3 weeks ago." "You're Jonathan Reed's daughter." It wasn't a question. She froze. "I am." Something flickered across his face, swift and unreadable, then vanished. He was looking at his son again. Samuel. His voice softened, losing some of its edge when he spoke his son's name. "Come here." Samuel looked up at Abigail first, as if seeking permission. That small gesture, that unconscious reaching towards her before his own father, did not escape the notice of either adult in their immediate vicinity. Samuel crossed to Nathaniel and pressed himself against his father's side. Nathaniel placed a hand on the boy's head without looking down, his eyes still fixed on Abigail. "Mrs. Bell," he said. The housekeeper materialized from the doorway. "Sir, have Miss Reed seen to. Put her in the east guest room." "The guest room, sir?" Mrs. Bell's voice carried the peculiar strain of a woman processing an instruction she found profoundly irregular. "That is what I said. Sir, the servants' hall would be more appropriate." "East guest room, Mrs. Bell." A pause. "Yes, sir." Silas had not departed. He stood amongst the cluster of silent men, like one who had decided that leaving now would be an admission of defeat, and Silas Whitaker did not admit defeat. "Nathaniel," he began, "I hope this won't affect our arrangement regarding the Fredericksburg matter. We have worked too long on." "We'll speak tomorrow," Nathaniel said. "Tonight, I believe, is concluded." It was not a suggestion. The east guest room smelled of cedar and old lavender. Abigail sat on the edge of a chair while Mrs. Bell moved about her with a basin of water and the tight-lipped efficiency of a woman holding a great many strong opinions she was currently keeping to herself. "Hold still, Mrs. Bell instructed, pressing a cloth to Abigail's back with more gentleness than her tone suggested. Abigail bit back the sound the pain elicited. "You know, Mrs. Bell remarked, wringing out the cloth, "in 12 years at Hawthorne Hall, I have never once put a seamstress in a guest room." "I understand, ma'am." The implication being, Mrs. Bell continued, that you have created a circumstance for which I have no precedent. I'm sorry for the trouble. Are you? It was not entirely a question. Mrs. Bell glanced at her sideways. You could have stayed back, Abigail said. Every other woman in this house would have stayed back. Every other woman in this house wasn't looking at that boy's face. Mrs. Bell was silent for a moment. She wrung the cloth again, with more force than necessary. He has these spells, she said finally, her voice dropping. His lungs, since he was small. 3 years ago, it was bad enough we nearly. She stopped, pressing her lips together. His father hired a tutor who lasted 6 weeks. The boy doesn't take to strangers. He took to me well enough tonight. Yes, Mrs. Bell said, and there was an inflection in that word that Abigail couldn't quite decipher. He did. She helped Abigail into a clean nightgown, clearly belonging to someone else, too long by 4 inches and far too fine by several social strata. She left her with a single lamp and the instruction to rest. Abigail did not rest. She sat in the unfamiliar chair in the unfamiliar room, pressing her fingers against the bruise blooming across her back, contemplating her actions and their potential cost. By morning, she expected dismissal. That was the most probable outcome, Mr. Hawthorne might have been touched by the moment, but men like Nathaniel Hawthorne made decisions in daylight that looked starkly different from those made in the dark, witnessed by others. She thought of the 3 weeks' wages she hadn't yet collected. She thought of the room she rented from old Mrs. Pruitt on the edge of town, 14 cents a week, 2 blankets, and a window that faced the wrong direction for warmth. She thought of her father's ledger, the one she kept at the bottom of her work basket, the one she had read so many times the pages had softened at the corners. They will take everything he had written in the last weeks before the sickness took him. They have already taken the school and the house and my name in this county. They will come for whatever remains. Do not let them have your courage, Abigail. That is the only thing they cannot steal. She hadn't slept that night either. In the morning, she anticipated a knock from Mrs. Bell, her final accounting in hand. Instead, it was Nathaniel Hawthorne himself who appeared in the doorway, knocking twice before entering, a courtesy she found surprising from a man of his station. "You're awake," he said. "Yes, sir." She had already dressed, done her hair, prepared herself for a professional dismissal. "How is your back?" "Well enough to work, sir." He looked at her steadily. His eyes were dark, the kind that offered little outward expression but missed nothing. "I didn't come to discuss your back." "Then what did you come to discuss, sir?" "My son slept through the night," Nathaniel stated. "Mrs. Bell tells me that hasn't happened in 4 months." Abigail remained silent. "He's been asking for you since 6 o'clock this morning," Nathaniel continued. "That is, I'm told, the first time he has asked for anyone who wasn't a member of the permanent household." She found she had no answer for that either. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Nathaniel pulled a chair from the writing desk and sat down opposite her, an action she hadn't anticipated. Men of his caliber did not often sit in the presence of a hired woman. They issued commands from doorways, or through housekeepers, or via notes passed by footmen. They did not sit down and look at you directly, as if you were their equal. "Miss Reed," he said, "I am told your father was Jonathan Reed, the schoolmaster." He was. He made accusations some years ago against a consortium of land speculators. He did. And the circuit court dismissed the accusations as unfounded. By a circuit court, I might add. That included 3 men with a vested financial interest in the outcome. Yes, sir. A beat of silence. That's a very precise way of putting it. I'm a precise woman. You didn't seem particularly precise last night. No, she conceded. Last night, I wasn't. He leaned back a fraction. Why were you able to calm Samuel when his own breathing exercises had failed him? The tutor I hired was trained in. Because I wasn't trying to calm him, Abigail said. I talked to him. There's a difference. When a child can't breathe, telling him to calm down is like telling a drowning man to stop splashing. What he needed was something to breathe times with. not instructions times about times breathing. Nathaniel studied her. You've dealt with this before. My father had students like Samuel. I assisted him in the schoolroom from the time I was 12. She paused. I also read everything I could find on the subject. There was a physician in Philadelphia who published a paper in 1809, Dr. Edward Miller, on the relationship between anxiety and respiratory function in children. It's not widely circulated, but it's not difficult to find if you're looking. Most seamstresses aren't looking for medical papers from Philadelphia. I am not most seamstresses, Mr. Hawthorne. He was quiet for a long moment then, almost to himself. No, I can see that. He stood, moved toward the window, his back to her. Abigail understood this was intentional, a gesture to grant her the privacy of his turned back as he articulated something he wasn't entirely sure how to say. Silas Whitaker, he said. He is a political ally. We have shared interests in land negotiations along the western border of the county. Abigail's voice became carefully neutral. Yes, sir. He is also, Nathaniel continued, a man I have known since we were both young and considerably more foolish, and a man I have watched make decisions that I found uncomfortable and told myself were not my business. She waited. What he did last night to my son, Nathaniel said, was my business. Yes, sir, it was. He turned back around. His expression hadn't changed on the surface, but something beneath it had tightened or settled or made a decision. I'm not dismissing you, Miss Reed. I'm asking you to consider a temporary position as Samuel's companion. Structured lessons, morning and afternoon. Appropriate wage. I'll ask Mrs. Bell to discuss the figure with you. Abigail blinked. It was perhaps the only uncareful thing she did in that entire conversation. A companion, sir? You have education, patience, and apparently the one skill set my son responds to. I would be a fool to put you back in the sewing room. I see. She took a breath. And Mr. Whitaker? Leave Mr. Whitaker to me. He'll say things, she said, not a warning, but a plain fact delivered, because she had learned that plain facts were more useful than sugar-coated ones. About why I'm in this house and what it means about my character. People like him always do. I'm aware of what people like him do. Begging your pardon, sir, but awareness and preparation are not the same thing either. He looked at her for a long moment, and she thought for just a second that the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Nothing so generous as that, but something that acknowledged the point had been well made. I'll manage my reputation, Miss Reed. You manage my son's education, and if he doesn't want to learn, he already trusts you. That's the harder half. She thought about 14 cents a week, and a window that faced the wrong direction. She thought about 3 weeks of wages still uncollected. She thought about her father's ledger in the bottom of her basket, soft at the corners. All right, she said. I'll stay. She found Samuel in the small upstairs sitting room, curled in the corner of a chair that was too big for him, turning a broken wooden horse over and over in his hands. One of its legs had snapped off at the joint and been glued back imperfectly, so it sat at the wrong angle, making the horse look like it was mid-stumble. Samuel looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and his face did something complicated, relief mixed with the particular weariness of a child who has been disappointed enough times to be careful about showing relief. You're still here, he said. I'm still here. Father said you might leave. Your father asked me to stay. Samuel considered this. Did you want to leave? Abigail came and sat on the footstool near his chair, close but not crowding him, because she had learned last night that this boy needed space around him, even when he needed company. No, she said. I didn't particularly want to leave. Because of money? She looked at him for a moment. 7 years old and already asking the honest questions. That's part of it, she said. Is that all right to say? Samuel seemed to appreciate the straight answer. He turned the broken horse over again. Cook says everyone who works here is only here for money. Cook's not entirely wrong. She says people are never kind unless they want something. Cook, Abigail said, sounds like she's had a hard time of it. Do you think she's right that people aren't really kind? Abigail looked at the broken horse in his small hands, at the glued leg set at its wrong angle. Someone had taken the trouble to fix it, even if the fixing wasn't perfect. I think, she said, that sometimes people are kind because they're afraid of something, afraid of being thought cruel, or afraid of punishment. And that kind of kindness doesn't hold up real well under pressure. Samuel's eyes were very serious. And the other kind doesn't think about it first. It just goes. He was quiet for a little while then. Like what you did last night. Like what I did last night, she agreed. He held the horse out toward her. Its leg keeps coming loose, he said. I glued it, but I didn't do it right. She took it gently, examined the joint. I can fix this properly. I'll need some good hide glue and a small clamp. We'll have to let it set overnight. Will it be as good as before it broke? Better, Abigail said, because we'll do it right this time. Samuel nodded slowly, the way children nod when they're filing something away under things that matter. Then he looked out toward the hallway where the house was already beginning its daytime noises, feet on stairs, a door opening somewhere below. The distant sound of Mrs. Bell's voice distributing the morning's instructions. Mr. Whitaker is downstairs, Samuel said, very quietly. Abigail's hands stilled on the horse. I know his voice, Samuel said, from the study. Is that so? He visits a lot. Samuel picked at the edge of his sleeve. Father doesn't always seem happy when he visits, but he always lets him in anyway. Abigail looked at this boy beside her, at the careful way he watched everything, the way he listened through walls, and filed away things that grown men assumed passed over children's heads. And she thought about her father's ledger, and about forged signatures, and about land taken from widows and veterans through debts that weren't real. She thought about Silas Whitaker's smile last night, the practiced one, the one that told you nothing. She thought about a circuit court with 3 interested men, and she thought Samuel sees more than anyone in this house has given him credit for. Well, she said, keeping her voice easy and steady, we don't need to worry about Mr. Whitaker this morning. This morning you and I are going to find some good hide glue and fix your horse properly, and then maybe you're going to teach me what you know about ciphers, because I've heard you're quite good. Samuel blinked. Who told you that? Mrs. Bell. She said you calculated the winter feed costs faster than the estate manager last October. A small surprise thing crossed his face, something close to pride, though he was clearly not used to wearing it. She didn't say that. She did. I believe her exact words were, "The boy has a head for numbers that would embarrass most grown men." Abigail tilted her head. Was she wrong? Samuel sat up a little straighter in the chair. No, he said with the quiet certainty of a child who has been underestimated long enough to know exactly what he is capable of. She wasn't wrong. Then we have work to do. Below them in the study at the foot of the stairs, Silas Whitaker's voice moved through the floor like smoke through a wall, smooth, warm, confident, and Nathaniel Hawthorne's answered it in short, careful syllables that gave nothing away. Abigail set the broken horse in her lap and did not look at the door, but she listened. Silas Whitaker spent 45 minutes in Nathaniel's study that morning, and Abigail counted every one of them. She could not hear the words through the floorboards, only the rhythm of them. Silas's voice moved in long, unhurried stretches, the way a man speaks when he believes he is the most reasonable person in the room. Nathaniel's answers came back short and measured. 3 syllables. 5. A pause. 3 more. The kind of answers that gave nothing away and cost nothing to give. Samuel heard it too. He sat across from Abigail at the small writing table with a sheet of arithmetic in front of him, but his pencil had stopped moving and his eyes were on the floor beneath their feet. He's telling Father I should be sent away, Samuel said. Abigail looked up from the wooden horse she was preparing for repair. What makes you say that? Because that's what he always does when something doesn't suit him. He tells Father what should be done about it. Samuel's jaw had a tightness to it that was too old for his face. And Father usually does it. Usually, Abigail said. Always, Samuel corrected quietly. Then he looked up at her. Are you scared? She considered lying. She decided against it. A little, she said. Are you? He nodded very small. I don't want you to go. Well, She set the horse down carefully. Let's not make plans for something that hasn't happened yet. You've got 6 multiplication problems on that page that are more pressing than Mr. Whitaker. You're changing the subject. I am? Solve your problems. He looked at her for another moment, that serious measuring look he had, and then he picked up his pencil. 43 minutes later, the study door opened and closed below them, and then the front door opened and closed, and Samuel's pencil moved a little faster. Okay. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway of the sitting room an hour later. He looked at Samuel's completed arithmetic sheet first, then at Abigail, then at the horse on the table between them, its broken legs set in a proper clamp. Now a thin bead of hide glue pressed into the joint with a nail head. That's a better repair than the last one, he said. We have to let it set until morning. Samuel told him with the authority of someone who has been thoroughly instructed. If you move it before the glue cures, the joint will be weaker than before. Miss Abigail says doing a repair badly is worse than not doing it at all, because then you think it's fixed when it isn't. Nathaniel's eyes moved to Abigail's face at that. She kept hers neutral. Miss Reed, he said, a word when you have a moment. Samuel, finish copying the last 2 lines of your poem. Abigail said, I'll be right outside the door. In the hallway, Nathaniel kept his voice low, not secretive, careful. There was a difference, and she was beginning to learn how to read him. Whitaker is concerned, he said, about the arrangement. I imagine he is. He believes your presence in this house creates a complication. He used a more specific word than complication, I suspect. Nathaniel didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. He suggested your background makes you a liability. Specifically, he cited your father's reputation and what he called the appearance of impropriety in having you here. Abigail felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the one she had learned to breathe through over 4 years of being Jonathan Reed's disgraced daughter in a county that had a long memory and a short mercy. And what was your response, sir? I told him the arrangement stood. She hadn't expected that. She let a beat pass before she spoke. Mr. Hawthorne, you understand that if Silas Whitaker is already speaking about the appearance of impropriety, he isn't going to stop at a private conversation with you. He'll take it further. I understand that. Your political standing. Miss Reed. His voice was not sharp, but it was final. I am aware of the implications. I told you this morning to leave my reputation to me, and I'm telling you respectfully that a reputation is easier to guard before it's damaged than after. And I'm telling you equally respectfully that I have made my decision. He paused. Samuel hasn't eaten a full meal in 3 weeks. This morning he ate everything on his plate and asked for more bread. I am not sending you away because Silas Whitaker finds your presence inconvenient. She looked at him for a long moment. He met it without flinching, which she was learning was simply how he was built. All right, she said. All right, he agreed, and went back downstairs. Mrs. Bell found her in the kitchen garden that afternoon, where Abigail had taken Samuel for his breathing exercises, slow walks in the open air. Dr. Carter's standing recommendation, which she'd extracted from the household medical ledger that morning with Mrs. Bell's tight-lipped permission. Samuel had gone ahead along the garden path examining something in the rose bushes with the focused intensity of a boy who has recently discovered that the natural world is more interesting than anyone told him. Mrs. Bell stopped beside Abigail and spoke without preamble. It's already in town. Abigail went still. Already? Betty Harrow's girl was at the milliner's this morning. She overheard 2 of the Whitaker household women talking. Mrs. Bell folded her hands in front of her. The story as it's currently being told is that you were Nathaniel's companion, shall we say, before last night. That the incident with Samuel was staged, that your being here is no accident. The sound of Samuel's delighted exclamation over something in the rose bushes floated back to them through the summer heat. Abigail watched him and kept her face very still. How bad? She asked. Bad enough that Reverend Hollis's wife has already sent a note to the house asking Mr. Hawthorne to clarify the nature of your employment. Mrs. Bell's voice was dry and precise. I burned it before he could see it, which I will deny if asked. Mrs. Bell, I have been in this house 12 years. The housekeeper said firmly. I know what kind of man Nathaniel Hawthorne is, and I know what kind of man Silas Whitaker is, and I know which one of them put their arm in front of that child last night, and which one raised a cane at him. I don't require additional data. Abigail looked at her. The older woman's jaw was set in the way of someone who has decided something and is not interested in being argued out of it. I need to tell you something, Abigail said. About why I'm here, about my father. I know about your father. Not all of it, Mrs. Bell looked at her steadily. Then tell me the rest. She told her about the ledger. Her father had kept it for 6 years. A careful schoolmaster's record of every irregularity he had discovered in the land transaction records for the Western County. Names, dates, property values listed against purchase prices that didn't match. Veterans' pension certificates turned over as debt collateral for loans they'd never actually received. Widows' land claims dismissed on the basis of clerical errors that weren't errors at all. They were alterations done in the same hand with the same ink 3 months before the circuit court reviews. The hand belonged to a clerk named Aldous Price, who worked directly for Silas Whitaker. Jonathan Reed had brought the ledger to the circuit court himself. He had stood in front of 3 men and laid it out page by page, column by column, with the precision of a man who has spent his life teaching children that evidence matters. The court had deliberated for 4 days. On the 5th day, they had ruled his evidence insufficient, his methodology flawed, and his accusations the product of, as they had phrased it, a schoolmaster's overreach into matters beyond his comprehension. 3 months later, Jonathan Reed's school had lost its county charter. 6 months after that, the creditors had come for the house. He was dead before the year was out. He left me the ledger, Abigail said, and the copies he'd made of the land contracts. I've been carrying them for 4 years. Mrs. Bell was quiet for a long time. Samuel's voice drifted in from the garden, asking something about whether bees slept at night. And Silas Whitaker, Mrs. Bell said slowly, he knows you're Jonathan Reed's daughter. Nathaniel told him this morning, I think, or he already knew. Then this isn't about impropriety, Mrs. Bell said. The rumors aren't about protecting anyone's reputation. He wants you out of this house before you find a reason to use what you're carrying. Abigail met her eyes. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Bell pressed her lips together until they went white. That man, she said in a voice like a door being locked, has eaten at this table for 11 years. Sorry. That evening, Nathaniel summoned her to the study. It was the first time she'd been in the room, and she noticed without looking, like she was noticing that the shelves held more law books than anything else, that the desk was organized with the precision of a man who needed control over at least one surface in his life, and that there was a framed miniature near the window of a woman with Samuel's eyes. He was standing when she came in. He did not sit. He turned from the window and said without opening pleasantries, I want to know about your father's records. She went very still. Sir, Mrs. Bell came to me an hour ago. His voice was measured, but underneath it was something she hadn't heard before, a tightness like a rope pulled to its limit. She told me what you told her. I'm asking you directly. What specifically do you want to know? I want to know if the records are reliable. I want to know what they contain, and I want to know, he said, why you've been carrying them for 4 years without doing anything with them. Because the last man who tried to do something with them died discredited. She said it plainly. Not with bitterness. She had burned through the bitterness years ago, and what was left was something colder and more useful. And because I'm a seamstress. No magistrate in this county is going to receive evidence from a seamstress. What if it wasn't a seamstress presenting it? The question sat between them like a stone dropped into still water. She looked at him. What are you saying? I'm saying that I have seen Silas Whitaker operate for 20 years. I know what he is. I have known for some time what he is. His jaw shifted. That is not a comfortable thing to admit. No, she said. I imagine it isn't. I told myself it wasn't my concern, that the legal questions were for the courts, that my influence was better spent on... He stopped. My son's mother died because a physician whose fees Silas helped inflate was the only one we could get on short notice. She could have been treated. She could have survived. His voice was still controlled, but barely. I have told myself that it is not connected, that it is coincidence, that attributing it to Silas is grief looking for a target, Abigail said quietly. Yes, is it, he was silent for long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. I don't know, he finally said. That's the honest answer. I don't know where his culpability ends. I do know that the men your father named in his records are still operating freely in this county. And I know that 3 of them were at my table last night. Abigail's breath caught. She steadied it. Including yourself. His eyes came up to hers sharply. I'm asking directly, she said, because if I'm going to trust what you're telling me, I need to know where you stood. The silence this time was a different weight, not evasion, something heavier, reckoning. I was not involved in the land transactions, he said. I received no financial benefit from them, but I sat on the advisory board that approved Aldous Price's clerical appointment. I attended 2 social events at which your father's accusations were discussed, and I said nothing in his defense. He looked at her steadily. That is the extent of it, as far as I know. I am prepared to accept that there may be things I don't know. Abigail stood with that for a moment, testing it, turning it over the way Samuel turned his horse over in his hands. That's more honest than I expected, she said. I'm not asking for absolution, Miss Reed. I'm asking if you still have those records. I have them. Then I need to see them. She brought the ledger down from her room after supper. It was wrapped in oilcloth, which she had never removed in all 4 years, except to read it herself by lamplight in rooms where no one could see her. She set it on his desk, unwrapped it carefully, and stood back. Nathaniel sat down and opened it. He read in silence for a long time. She stood near the door, not because she was required to, but because it felt right, because the ledger was her father's, and watching someone else read it was a particular kind of exposure she hadn't prepared herself for. After 20 minutes, he turned to a specific page and held it toward her. This entry. March 1814. Whitaker is listed here alongside 2 names I don't recognize, Hargrove and Dennett. Hargrove is a land broker out of Fredericksburg. Dennett is a notary who retired to the Eastern Shore in 1816. She paused. Conveniently, I've always thought. The Fredericksburg matter, Nathaniel said very quietly. She looked at him. That is what Silas came here to discuss this morning, Nathaniel said. He called it the Fredericksburg matter, a land negotiation on the western border. He was still looking at the ledger. Hargrove's name is on the proposal documents I have in this drawer. The room was very quiet. Mr. Hawthorne, Abigail said carefully, how long has this negotiation been in progress? 8 months. And what did Silas tell you the land was? Unclaimed federal grant territory, disputed boundary, previous claimant deceased. My father's records list that same territory, Abigail said, under 4 veterans' names. The claims were filed in 1811 and rejected on the basis of a clerical error in the boundary survey. She paused. The survey was conducted by Aldous Price. Nathaniel's hand went flat on the desk. They're doing it again, Abigail said. Right now, and they needed your name on it, didn't they? Because you're a judge's son, because your endorsement makes the transaction legitimate. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He wasn't just here this morning to talk about me, she said. No, Nathaniel said. He wasn't. The lamp between them had burned low without either of them noticing. Outside, the summer dark had settled into its full weight, and somewhere down the hall a door opened and then closed. Mrs. Bell, making her final rounds. Miss Reed. His voice had changed again, something dissolving in it like a compound, settling after a long agitation. If I move against Whitaker officially, legally, with your father's records as evidence, it will be dangerous. For this house, for Samuel. For you specifically, because he will make certain that every ugly story he has already started telling becomes something the entire county believes. I know that, she said. I want to make sure you understand what you'd be choosing. Mr. Hawthorne, She kept her voice very even. I have been choosing this since the day they buried my father. I just haven't had anyone willing to stand beside me. She met his eyes. Are you willing? He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she was aware of her own heartbeat. I am going to send a letter tonight, he said, to Judge Elias Whitmore in Richmond. He owes me a conversation about evidentiary review. He reached for the ledger. May I keep this? It's the only copy I have. I'll have it transcribed in the morning by someone I trust. He held it carefully, not reverently exactly, but with the attention of a man who understands what he's holding. Your father built something careful here. It deserves better than a drawer. She stood very still because she did not entirely trust her voice. Thank you, she said finally. Don't thank me yet, Nathaniel said. Whitaker has 30 years of practice at this. Whatever we build, he will try to tear down, and the first thing he'll tear at is you. I know. Then get some sleep, Miss Reed. Tomorrow is going to require a clear head. She was at the door when he spoke again. Your father, he said. She turned. He was still looking at the ledger open on his desk. He was right about all of it. He didn't look up. I'm sorry it took this long for someone to say that to you. She had waited 4 years to hear it. She had rehearsed in her head in the long dark of Mrs. Pruitt's rented room what she might feel when someone finally acknowledged it. She had expected relief or vindication or grief. What she felt standing in Nathaniel Hawthorne's study doorway with the summer night pressing against the windows was something quieter and more dangerous than any of those. She felt like she was not entirely alone for the first time in 4 years. And she walked upstairs before it could settle into something she didn't know how to carry. By the following morning, the rumors had already reached the church steps. Mrs. Bell's kitchen girl came in white-faced before breakfast was set with the news that 2 women from Reverend Hollis's congregation had declared publicly that Hawthorne Hall had fallen into disorder and that Nathaniel Hawthorne's judgment could no longer be trusted in civil matters. This last part, delivered with the kind of pointed weight that made its meaning about his suitability for any future appointed position perfectly clear. Mrs. Bell heard this in silence. She dismissed the girl back to her work. She stood for a moment in the kitchen, and then she said to the wall, Silas Whitaker has not changed in 30 years. He still cannot stand to lose. In the upstairs sitting room, Samuel was already at his writing table when Abigail arrived. He had not waited for her to start. He was halfway through a letter he was writing in careful, deliberate print, his tongue pressed to his upper lip with the effort of it. She stood in the doorway and looked at what he was writing. To my father, I want you to know that Miss Abigail is good. She is the best teacher I have had. If you send her away, I will not eat again. I am not saying this to be dramatic. I mean it factually. Your son, Samuel. Abigail pressed her fingers briefly over her mouth. Then she came in, pulled her chair to the table, and said in a perfectly ordinary voice, I appreciate the support, Samuel. Let's work on your spelling of dramatically. You've used the wrong root. Samuel looked up at her. The letter sat between them. Did you read it? He asked. I did. And you should never have to use threats to make someone stay, she said. But I'm very glad you want me here. She paused. Now, dramatic comes from the Greek dramatikos. Let's talk about what that means because I think you'll find it useful. He stared at her for a moment longer. Then he pulled the letter back and began correcting his spelling. Outside the sitting room window, down in the yard, a rider was crossing toward the house at a pace that had Mrs. Bell stepping out to meet him before he reached the door. Abigail watched her sign for the letter he carried, watched her read it standing in the yard, watched her face go very still in a way that meant something had arrived that changed the shape of the morning. She kept her voice steady. What's 6 times 14, Samuel? 84, he said without looking up. Good, she said, and did not look out the window again. The letter Mrs. Bell had received in the yard was a formal summons. Not for Nathaniel, for Abigail. She found out at breakfast when Mrs. Bell set the folded paper beside her plate without ceremony and said in the voice of a woman delivering a diagnosis, Magistrate Corbin, his office 2 days hence. You are formally accused of theft of property from this household. Samuel's spoon stopped moving. Abigail looked at the paper. She did not pick it up. What property? A silver pocket watch, engraved belonging, according to the complaint, to Mr. Silas Whitaker, who claims it went missing from the front hall the night of the supper. I see. It was found. Mrs. Bell continued, each word placed down like a stone. Among your belongings in the East guest room, by a member of the household staff who was acting on an anonymous tip. Which staff member? A pause. Thomas. The footman. Who hired Thomas? Another pause. Longer. He came with a letter of recommendation from the Whitaker household 8 months ago. Samuel pushed his plate away. He put it there. He said, Mr. Whitaker put it there. Samuel. Abigail started. He did. The boy's voice was shaking, but it was anger, not fear, which was new and startling and somehow worse. He didn't lose any watch. He wore that watch at supper. I saw it. It was on his chain. I know, Abigail said quietly. Then tell them. Tell the magistrate. Samuel. She kept her voice level. Eat your breakfast. How can you eat breakfast when, because in 2 days I have to stand in front of a room full of people who have already made up their minds, and I intend to be rested, fed, and entirely clear-headed when I do it? She met his eyes. Now, eat. He stared at her for a long moment with his father's eyes in his young face. Then he picked up his spoon. Nathaniel read the summons standing in the hallway outside the dining room, and Abigail watched his face go through 3 distinct stages in the space of about 15 seconds. The first was recognition. He knew exactly what this was and who had arranged it. The second was a cold, controlled fury that he pulled down out of sight with visible effort. The third was something she didn't have a word for, yet some combination of guilt and decision that settled across his features like a man putting on armor. He moved faster than I expected, Nathaniel said. He moved because you didn't, she said. The letter to Judge Whitmore, Silas found out about it. How? You used a house messenger. Thomas delivered it. She watched that land. I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner about the footman, but I didn't have proof of anything except suspicion. Nathaniel folded the summons. I'll go to Corbin's office today and… No. He looked at her. If you go to Corbin before the hearing, it looks like interference. It looks like exactly what Silas is already saying it is. She kept her voice steady. You attending that hearing and presenting evidence through proper legal channels is useful. You pressuring a magistrate in private is the thing that ruins both of us. The silence had a particular quality, the quality of a man realizing that the woman in front of him has thought further ahead than he has. All right, he said. What do you need? Dr. Carter, she said. You mentioned he's a reformer, that he has connections to the press in Richmond. I need to know if he can be at that hearing. I can send for him today. I also need you to pull the Fredericksburg land proposal documents from your study and compare every signature on them against the copies in my father's ledger. Page 43. The Price signature appears there, and I believe it appears on your documents as well. And if it does, it means the same forger has been operating for 15 years, Nathaniel said, and that the circuit court that dismissed my father's evidence contained men who knew it was being falsified. He was very still. That is a serious accusation. Yes, sir, it is. She held his gaze. Are you still willing? He didn't hesitate this time, not even a full second. I'll have the documents pulled within the hour. Doctor. Elias Carter arrived before supper. He was a lean, quick-eyed man in his late 40s who had the look of someone who had spent decades watching people avoid the truth and had made a personal project of being in the room when it finally came out. He shook Abigail's hand the way he'd shake any man's, firmly without ceremony, and said, I've been waiting for someone to pick up Jonathan Reed's case for 4 years. I'm sorry it took a theft charge to do it. Did you know my father? She asked. I knew what he was trying to do. I wrote him a letter in the spring of 1815 offering to help. He died before I heard back. Carter looked at her steadily. I always regretted that. They sat in Nathaniel's study, all three of them, with the ledger open on the desk and the Fredericksburg proposal papers beside it, and for 2 hours they went through it page by page. Carter made notes in a small book with efficient, spidery handwriting. Nathaniel moved between the documents with the focused attention of a man who is dismantling something he helped build and intends to be precise about it. At the point where Nathaniel placed the Fredericksburg signature beside the ledger signature from 1814, and they were unmistakably the same hand, Carter set his pen down and said quietly, God Almighty. Price, Nathaniel said. Price has been notarizing false land claims for 15 years under 4 different county jurisdictions. Carter picked the pen back up. I have been trying to get sufficient evidence for a press account for 3 years. This, he gestured at the ledger. This is sufficient. It wasn't sufficient for the circuit court, Abigail said. The circuit court is not the Richmond Enquirer, Carter said. And Silas Whitaker cannot buy every reader in Virginia. Nod. The night before the hearing, Samuel appeared at the door of Abigail's room. He was in his nightgown, and his feet were bare, and he was holding his wooden horse, its repaired leg now set straight and solid, cured and good. He held it out toward her. I want you to take it tomorrow, he said. She looked at the horse. Samuel, I can't take your— It's fixed right now, he said. You said so. You said a right repair is stronger than it was before. He pushed it a little closer. I want you to have something that's fixed right. She took it. It sat in her palm, small and solid. You should go back to bed, she said. I want to come tomorrow to the hearing. Your father said no. I know what father said. He looked at her with that old, serious face. But I saw Mr. Whitaker's watch that night. I saw it on his chain. I'm the only one who can say that. You're 7 years old. The magistrate won't. I'm almost 8, Samuel said with enormous dignity. And I know what I saw. And my father always says that a man, or a person who sees something wrong and says nothing, is part of the wrong. He paused. Did he ever actually say that to you? Not to me, no. He says it a lot. Mostly when he's talking about things he didn't do that he wishes he had. Samuel looked down at the horse in her hands. I don't want to be the kind of person who wishes they had. Abigail looked at him for a long moment. This boy who had spent years being too small and too sick and too easily overlooked in a house full of important adult concerns, standing in a doorway in bare feet with his jaw set and his mind made up. Go back to bed, she said gently, and in the morning, talk to your father. He nodded once, turned, then looked back. Miss Abigail, are you scared? Yes, she said, but I reckon fear and courage aren't opposites. They're the same feeling pointing in different directions. He thought about that. I think I understand, he said solemnly, the way he said most things, and went back to bed. Magistrate Corbin's office was standing room by the time Abigail arrived. This, she realized, was Silas's doing too. He'd craved an audience. He'd ensured the news didn't travel through official channels, but instead, via hushed whispers across parlor carpets and over church steps, propelled by the particular velocity, a scandal involving a man of power and a woman of low birth, gains in a county that remembers much and forgives little. She entered the room beside Nathaniel, her back ramrod straight, hands clasped, a smooth wooden horse tucked in her dress pocket. Every eye in the room found her, held her. Silas was already seated near the front, accompanied by his attorney and a witness, a gaunt man with hands like bleached parchment who couldn't quite meet anyone's gaze. His face wore the expression of a man paid to recall something specific. As she took her place, Silas met her eyes, offering that practiced, pleasant smile that revealed nothing. She looked away first, not out of timidity, but because she had matters to attend to, and Silas Whitaker's face was not among them. Magistrate Corbin, a burly man in his 60s, exuded the weary air of one who had presided over countless hearings and was utterly unmoved by drama. With 2 sharp raps of his gavel, he called the room to order and, in a flat, efficient voice, read the charge: theft. of property. One silver pocket watch, engraved, valued at approximately $12, found among the personal effects of Abigail Reed, an employee at Hawthorne Hall. Mr. Hawthorne, Corbin said, peering over his spectacles at Nathaniel, you are the employer in question. What is your position in this matter? I stand with Miss Reed, Nathaniel stated clearly. I believe the charge to be false and intend to prove as much. A ripple of surprise went through the room, but Corbin's expression remained unchanged. Very well, Mr. Whitaker, present your witness. The thin man with paper-white hands stood and, in a carefully rehearsed monotone, recounted his story. He was, he claimed, a traveling merchant who had been present at the supper. He'd seen Abigail Reed near the coat rack by the front hall early that evening. He'd noticed, he emphasized, his voice suggesting he'd been coached, that she had lingered for an unusual amount of time near Mr. Whitaker's coat. Silas's attorney then delivered a brief, polished argument about character, background, and opportunity, using the word desperation twice. Then Nathaniel stood. He didn't begin with an argument. Instead, he laid 3 documents on Corbin's table: the Fredericksburg land proposal, a copy of a page from Abigail's father's ledger, and a signed letter from Judge Elias Whitmore in Richmond, requesting Corbin to suspend proceedings pending a formal evidentiary review. Silas's attorney was on his feet before Nathaniel had finished placing the documents. This is a theft hearing, not a land arbitration. These documents are irrelevant. They are relevant, Nathaniel countered, his voice calm, because the man who brought this charge has a vested financial interest in removing Miss Reed from my household before she can produce her father's records in a formal legal setting. And because the signature on your client's Fredericksburg proposal appears on a document within those records, dated 1814, notarized by a man named Aldous Price in connection with the fraudulent dismissal of 4 veterans' land claims. He looked at Corbin. I am suggesting that this charge was manufactured, and I am suggesting that Judge Whitmore's letter provides you cause to examine that suggestion before proceeding. The room fell into that particular kind of silence that descends when something has shifted, and everyone feels it, yet no one is yet ready to voice it. Corbin picked up Whitmore's letter, read it, set it down, and looked at Silas. Silas's smile, though still present, had thinned considerably. He spread his hands. Nathaniel, this is impressive theater, but the watch was found in her room. The witness placed her near The watch, a small, clear voice cut in from the back of the room, was on your chain the night of the supper. Every head snapped around. Samuel Hawthorne stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in his best coat, hair neatly combed, chin held high, with the determined, almost terrified look of a child who has made a decision and intends to see it through, regardless of the personal cost. Beside him, equally surprised, stood Mrs. Bell, who, having apparently been unable to stop him, had chosen instead to accompany him, a statement in itself. Nathaniel's face flickered with a complex, fleeting emotion. He spoke his son's name, a single word, quiet but laden with a weight that wasn't quite anger. I saw it, Samuel said, walking forward through the parting crowd, for people naturally make way for children with that look in their eyes. It was on his gold chain, on his left side. I spilled the wine, and I looked right at it when I was trying to apologize. It had an eagle engraved on the back. He stopped before Corbin's table and looked up at the magistrate. Sir, I know I'm small, but I'm not wrong about what I saw. Corbin looked down at the boy over his spectacles for a long moment. Son, he said, not unkindly, this is a serious matter. Yes, sir, that's why I'm here. Silas's attorney began an objection regarding the competency of child witnesses. Silas himself murmured something low to the man beside him, a remark that caused the thin man's paper-white hands to grip his knees. Then, Dr. Carter, who had been standing quietly against the side wall throughout the proceedings, spoke for the first time. I can speak to the engraving, he said. I am Dr. Elias Carter, and I treated the Whitaker household for a fever outbreak in the spring of 1813. Mr. Whitaker himself showed me the watch as a point of personal pride at a dinner in April of that year. He described it as a family piece. It has an eagle on the reverse and a hairline crack across the crystal, which was present even then. He paused. If the watch recovered from Miss Reed's room has that crack, it was placed there, because a woman careful enough to steal something would not take an item she had specifically been shown and told to admire. The silence in the room shifted again, from judgment to recalculation. "Produce the watch," Corbin commanded. The court clerk brought the watch forward in a cloth bag. Corbin turned it over in his hands, examining the crystal. He set it down on his table and looked at Silas for a long moment. "There's a crack," he stated. Something flickered across Silas's face, then the first truly honest expression Abigail had seen there. It was quick, swiftly controlled, but it was there a glimpse of the man behind the practiced smile. And what she saw was not outrage or indignation, but calculation. He was already looking for an exit. "Nathaniel," Silas said, his voice pitched to Carrie, "you understand what you're doing. Everything we've built, the Western negotiations, the appointments, the committee work, you're burning it all for a seamstress whose father was a discredited." "Her father was right," Nathaniel interrupted. The room went utterly still. Nathaniel repeated, not louder, but slower, allowing each word its full weight. "Jonathan Reed was right about the land claims, about the forged signatures, about price, about all of it. I know that now because I have spent 2 days reading the evidence he died trying to present." He held Silas's gaze across the crowded room. "And you know it too. You've known it since the day he walked into that courtroom." Silas's attorney placed a hand on his client's arm. Silas shook it off. "This is slander," Silas declared. "This is a coordinated campaign by a woman with a grievance and a man who has clearly lost his mind." "Mr. Whitaker," Corbin's voice boomed, silencing the attorney. "You will be quiet." The attorney tried again. Silas remained unquiet. He turned toward the room, toward the audience he had so carefully assembled, his voice rising, his composure unraveling at the seams. The room watched Silas Whitaker without his mask for the first time, and it was not a comfortable sight. It was in that moment, as Silas was still talking, still performing, still trying to twist the narrative to his advantage, that Abigail spoke. She hadn't planned to. She'd told herself the evidence would suffice, that Nathaniel's documents, Carter's testimony, and Samuel's clear, small voice would be enough, and she wouldn't need to stand before a room full of people who had already judged her and prove anything. But she thought of her father, standing in a different courtroom in this very county, with the same careful ledger, the same certainty, and the same room full of people who had already made up their minds. She remembered the way he had written in the margins, small notations in his schoolmaster's hand, precise even when his hands shook in those final months. Evidence matters. Truth matters. Do not let them make you small. She stood up. Silas stopped talking. The room turned. Abigail Reed stood in the center of the courtroom, in a county that had spent 4 years using her father's name as a synonym for foolishness. She wore a dress that was well mended and carefully pressed, for she had spent the previous night ensuring it was so. She looked directly at Silas Whitaker and said, "My father built his case on a schoolmaster's salary and borrowed time with borrowed ink, and he walked into a room just like this one and told the truth, knowing exactly what it would cost him." Her voice did not shake. She had seen to that, too. "You took his school. You took his house. You took his name in this county. And then you took whatever years he had left, because a man who has had everything stripped from him doesn't live long on pride alone." She took a breath. "But you did not take his ledger, and you did not take his daughter. And every page of evidence you thought you buried is sitting on that table right now, with a judge's letter, a physician's testimony, and a little boy's word. And none of it is going away." She looked at him steadily. "My father was buried under your lies, Mr. Whitaker. I will not be buried under them too." The room was utterly, completely silent. Silas turned toward the door. Nathaniel was already there. He hadn't moved dramatically. At some point during Abigail's speech, he had simply crossed the room and positioned himself between Silas Whitaker and the exit. He stood there now, arms at his sides, his expression a terrifying, controlled stillness. It was the same look he'd worn in the hall that night when he'd said, "If you raise that cane again, you will leave without the hand that holds it." Silas stopped. "Sit down, Silas," Nathaniel said quietly. "It's over." For a long moment, nothing in the room moved. Then, Silas Whitaker sat down, Magistrate Corbin picked up his gavel, and the case against Abigail Reed collapsed like a structure whose foundation had never been real to begin with. Samuel reached across the space between them and took Abigail's hand. She held on. They walked out of Magistrate Corbin's office into a summer afternoon that hadn't yet received the news. The heat lay on the street as it always did. The horses at the post were tied in the same way. The milliner's door was propped open, but every person on that street turned to watch them emerge. Nathaniel on one side, Dr. Carter on the other. Samuel, still holding Abigail's hand with the focused grip of a child who has made a decision and intends to see it through. And the watching had a different quality than it had when they'd walked in. It had the quality of a room after a window breaks. Everything technically the same, but also permanently changed. Abigail looked straight ahead. A woman near the dry goods store, Mrs. Aldridge, whose husband sat on the county planning committee, pulled her daughter closer when they passed, as though proximity to Abigail Reed was a weather condition to be avoided. Two men by the post office watched Nathaniel with expressions that said they were recalculating something fast and didn't particularly enjoy the arithmetic. Then old Margaret Pruitt, who had rented Abigail her 14-cent room for 2 years and never once asked a personal question, called out from across the street, "Good for you, girl." Not loud, just enough to carry. Abigail didn't look over. But her grip on Samuel's hand steadied. Mrs. Bell was waiting at the carriage. She took one look at all of them and said to nobody in particular, "It went the right way then." She didn't phrase it as a question. "It went the right way," Carter confirmed. "For now, Corbin has suspended the charge pending Whitmore's evidentiary review. Whitaker's attorney is already filing objections. It won't be over in a week." "What does that mean?" Samuel asked. "It means," Carter said, "that we won a battle today. The war is still in progress." Samuel considered this with the gravity of a boy who has learned more about how the world actually operates in the past 3 days than in his previous 7 years combined. "Then we keep going," he said. Carter looked at him over the boy's head and said to Nathaniel, "You've got a remarkable son." Nathaniel looked at Samuel. Something moved across his face. Not the controlled, careful thing Abigail had grown accustomed to, but something younger and less managed. "Yes," he said. "I know." The drive. The drive back to Hawthorne Hall was quiet in the way that quiet gets after something enormous. Samuel fell asleep against Abigail's shoulder within the first mile, his good coat still buttoned to the throat, his breathing slow and even. She kept still so as not to wake him, and she looked out at the passing summer fields and let herself feel, for the first time since the summons had arrived, the full weight of what had just happened. Her father had been right. She had always known it the way you know things when you carry them in your body for years. But knowing a thing and having it spoken aloud in a room full of witnesses by a man whose word this county respected were not the same thing, not even close. She became aware that Nathaniel was watching her from across the carriage. "Say what you're thinking," she said without looking at him. "I'm thinking you held yourself together in there better than most men I've seen in that room." "That's not what you were going to say." A pause. "No," he admitted. "I was going to say I'm sorry for what happened to your father, for not knowing sooner, for knowing Silas for 20 years and telling myself it wasn't my business." Abigail looked down at Samuel's sleeping face. "I appreciate that." But he heard it in her voice before she found the words for it. But an apology and a change aren't the same thing either. She kept her tone even, not unkind, just honest. "And I've been protected by powerful men before, Mr. Hawthorne." My father's employer protected him right up until the moment it became inconvenient. Then he wrote a letter to the county board saying he'd always had concerns about my father's judgment. She met his eyes. Protection isn't the same as standing beside someone. Nathaniel held her gaze. He didn't flinch from it, and he didn't argue with it, which she was beginning to understand was its own kind of character. Then tell me, he said carefully, what standing beside you looks like. I don't know yet, she said, but I'll know it when I see it. By the following morning, the story was in Richmond. Carter had wasted no time. The account went to the Inquirer by overnight rider, a careful documented piece that named Silas Whitaker, Aldous Price, and the 3 circuit court members who had dismissed Jonathan Reed's evidence in 1815. It named the veterans whose land claims had been stolen. It named the widows. It named the amounts. It included a reproduction of 2 entries from the ledger, and it included at Abigail's specific request her father's name, spelled correctly, with his title. Mr. Jonathan Reed, schoolmaster. Mrs. Bell brought the paper to Abigail's room before breakfast, without comment, set it on the table, and stood back. Abigail read it twice. When she looked up, Mrs. Bell's mouth was pressed firmly together in the way it got when she was feeling something she didn't intend to express. Her eyes, though, were bright. He spelled your father's name correctly, Mrs. Bell said. He did. And yours? Yes. A pause. Mrs. Bell straightened a fold in her apron that didn't need straightening. I knew your father, she said. Not personally, but I knew of him. My sister's children attended his school before it closed. She stopped. Straightened the apron again. He taught the older girls to read the land survey maps, said women who couldn't read property documents were women who could be robbed. She looked at Abigail directly. He was right about that, too. Abigail set the paper down carefully. Mrs. Bell, I owe you an apology for the first week, Mrs. Bell said at a speed that suggested she had been building toward it for days. I was not kind. I was suspicious, and I was protective of this house in ways that did not account for what you actually were. She folded her hands. I am not accustomed to being wrong about people. When I am, I prefer to acknowledge it efficiently and move on. Abigail looked at the older woman at the rigid spine and the carefully managed expression and the eyes that were still too bright. Acknowledged, she said efficiently. The corner of Mrs. Bell's mouth did something it didn't usually do. Good. Breakfast in 20 minutes. Silas Whitaker was formally arrested 3 days later. The warrant came from Richmond, from Judge Whitmore's office, with enough specificity in the charges that Silas's attorney's objections couldn't hold the door. Fraud, falsification of public records, conspiracy and the wrongful dismissal of lawful property claims. There were 7 names on the charge. Silas's was first, Price's was second. Abigail heard about it from Carter, who arrived at Hawthorne Hall mid-morning with the news and the expression of a man who has waited a very long time for a particular day and is not entirely sure how to occupy his face now that it has arrived. It won't be clean, he said. His attorney is good, and the case will take months, but the land claims the veteran families. They can petition for review now. The dismissal judgment against your father's original complaint can be challenged. Can it be overturned posthumously? Carter hesitated. Formally, possibly not, but publicly in the record and print, yes, his name can be cleared. He looked at her carefully. That matters, doesn't it? More than you've said. Yes, she said simply. It matters more than almost anything. The first family arrived that afternoon. Nathaniel had sent word through Carter to 3 of the veteran families named in Jonathan's ledger, inviting them to Hawthorne Hall to discuss the review process. Abigail did not know he had done this until she heard Mrs. Bell directing an older man and his wife toward the main sitting room, not the kitchen, not the servants' hall, the main sitting room, and went to see who it was. The man's name was Henry Marsh. He was 63. A former Continental soldier with a hand missing 2 fingers from an old wound. His wife, Clara, was small and careful, and wore a dress that had been let out and taken in enough times that the original fabric was barely represented. They sat in Nathaniel Hawthorne's sitting room with the posture of people who have been given good seats as a prelude to bad news so many times that they no longer trusted good seats. Nathaniel was with them. He stood when Abigail came in and said, "Miss Reed, Henry Marsh. His family's claim is the first entry on your father's ledger." Henry Marsh looked at Abigail with eyes that had done a great deal of measuring in their time. "You're Jonathan Reed's girl," he said. "I am. Your father came to see us in the winter of 1814 before the hearing." He leaned forward slightly. "He sat in our kitchen and showed us every page of what he'd found. He told us he was going to take it to the court, and he really believed it was going to work." The old man's jaw shifted. "When it didn't, my Clara cried for 3 days. Not for us, we'd already lost the land by then. She cried because your father looked like a man who'd had his spine taken out." Abigail sat down because her knees had made a decision independently of her intentions. "He gave us something before he left," Henry said. He reached into his coat slowly, carefully, the way a man reaches for something he's carried a long time. He produced a folded letter thick with age, sealed with plain wax. He said if anything happened to him to keep it. Said one day someone would come asking about the land claims, and when they did, to give it to them. He held it out across the table. "He wrote your name on it, miss, on the back." Abigail took it. Her name was on the back in her father's handwriting. The same hand that had filled the ledger. The same schoolmaster's letters, careful and unhurried. "Abigail." The room was very quiet. "I'll give you a moment," Nathaniel said quietly. He touched Henry Marsh on the shoulder as he passed a brief gesture unannounced, and took Clara's hand for just a second, the way you take a hand when words aren't the right instrument. Then he left and closed the door behind him. The letter was 4 pages long. Her father had written it in January of 1816, when the sickness was already in his lungs, and he knew the arithmetic of it. He wrote the way he had always written, precisely without self-pity, with the footnotes of a man who trusted evidence over feeling, but understood that feeling was also a kind of evidence. He told her he was sorry he had not been able to finish it. He told her the ledger was in the lining of his second coat, which she had already found because she was his daughter, and she was thorough. He told her the names he trusted, Carter among them, and the names he did not. He told her that the land claims could still be proven if someone with standing chose to pursue them. And then, in the last half of the last page in handwriting that was less careful than the rest, because his hand had been shaking by then, he told her something else. "You were always braver than you knew, Abigail. I knew it when you were 9 years old and stood in front of a boy twice your size to stop him hurting a smaller child, and I knew it every day after. I was a schoolmaster. I taught people to find truth in books and records and evidence. But you find it in people. You always have. That is rarer and more useful than anything I ever taught, and I am sorry I did not tell you so more often. Whatever happens now, know that I was proud of you every single day. Not of what you accomplished, of who you were while you were accomplishing it. Don't let them make you small. Don't let them make you quiet. And when someone worthy of it offers to stand beside you, let them." She folded the letter. She sat with it in her hands for a long time. She found Nathaniel in his study, which had become, over the past weeks, a room she no longer needed permission to enter. He looked up from the documents on his desk and read her face in the 2 seconds it took her to cross the room, and he said nothing, which was the correct thing. She set the letter on the desk in front of him. Not all of it. The last page. "He trusted Carter," she said. "He trusted that eventually someone would come." She paused. "He trusted me to carry it." Nathaniel read the page. She watched him read it, and she watched something happen in his face that she had not seen there before. Not the controlled stillness or the careful management, but something open and a little undefended, the way faces get when they're reading something that catches them off guard. He set it down. He didn't say anything immediately. She had learned to wait for Nathaniel Hawthorne's immediately. It was rarely the thing that mattered. "There is a building," he said finally, "on the east side of the estate. It was my wife's project. She wanted to open a school for the servants' children and the farm workers' daughters. She didn't live long enough." He looked at the letter, nodded at Abigail. I closed it after she died. Told myself I'd deal with it when I had time. He paused. I have never had time because I have never made time. There is a difference, and I have been aware of it. Abigail waited. I would like to open it, Nathaniel said, properly, with a teacher who knows what she's doing. He looked up at her. I'm not offering it as charity. I'm not offering it because I feel guilty, though I do. I'm offering it because it's the right thing to do, and you're the right person to do it, and I am done waiting until I have time. He held her gaze. Will you take it? She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had sat in parlors with Silas Whitaker for 20 years and told himself it wasn't his business, who had watched her father be destroyed from a comfortable distance and done nothing, who had then, when it mattered, stood in the doorway of a courthouse and blocked the exit of the man responsible for all of it. What would my authority be? She said. Over the curriculum, the student selection, the hours, full authority. I will fund it and stay out of your way. And if the county objects, if Reverend Hollis sends another letter, then I'll write back, a pause, in more specific terms than last time. She looked at the letter on his desk, her father's handwriting on the last page, the unsteady letters of a man whose hand was failing, but whose mind was still clear. When someone worthy of it offers to stand beside you, let them. I'll take it, she said. The weeks that followed had a different texture than anything that had come before. Nathaniel sent writers to 4 families whose land claims were in Jonathan Reed's ledger. He did not send a letter. He went himself to each one, which Abigail did not know until Mrs. Bell mentioned it in passing, not as a compliment, just as information, the way Mrs. Bell delivered most things. He came back from the 3rd visit looking like a man who has had something rearranged inside him. He sat down at his study desk without taking off his coat and wrote for 2 hours. She did not ask what he was writing. She set a cup of coffee beside him and went back to her work and let him have it. Later, she found out he had written to the county records office, requesting a formal petition for review of each dismissed land claim. He had signed the letters with his own name, with his title, with his full professional weight behind them. He had also enclosed with each petition a handwritten note to the family in question. Not formal, not legal. Just a man's handwriting saying, I should have done this sooner. I am sorry that I did not. Carter published a second piece in the Times-Inquirer, shorter, more precise, detailing the progress of the evidentiary review. The response to it was larger than the first. 3 letters arrived at Hawthorne Hall from families in neighboring counties with similar experiences. Carter came out twice to take their accounts. The county remained divided, which Abigail had expected. Some people came around quickly, those who had liked her father, those who had their own reasons to distrust Silas Whitaker, those who simply followed the direction of whoever seemed to be winning. Others held their position like it was structural. Reverend Hollis preached a sermon that managed to neither condemn nor fully support anyone while making everyone feel vaguely criticized, which Abigail reflected was a specific talent. Mrs. Aldridge stopped pulling her daughter away on the street. It was a small thing, but it was real. Samuel was eating 3 full meals a day. This was Mrs. Bell. He announced one morning over the household accounts, as though it were a budget item that had come in under projection, a notable development. His breathing exercises had become a regular part of his morning. Not a medical procedure, not a frightening intervention, just something he and Abigail did on the east lawn before lessons, walking the garden path while she counted the rhythm and he matched it the way you match a song. Someone is humming. He had also, somewhere in the preceding weeks, stopped introducing himself to visitors as Mr. Hawthorne's son and started saying his own name first. One morning he told Abigail, in the middle of a lesson on colonial history, that he wanted to be a judge when he grew up. Why a judge? She asked. He thought about it seriously. Because judges decide what counts as proof, he said. And I want to be one of the ones who gets it right. She looked at him for a moment. That's a good reason, she said. What did you want to be? He asked. When you were small? A teacher, she said. Like my father. And now you are. And now I am. He considered this with the satisfaction of a problem resolved. Things work out sometimes, he said, even when it takes a long time. Sometimes, she agreed. And sometimes they don't. And you carry that too. But yes, Samuel, sometimes they do. Audited. It was a Tuesday evening in late August when Nathaniel found her in the small room beside the new schoolhouse, sorting donated books by reading level, and stood in the doorway the way he had stood in doorways all those weeks ago when he was still learning how to be in the same room as her without managing it. "You've been avoiding a conversation," he said. "I've been busy," she said without looking up from the books. "You've been busy and avoiding a conversation. Both things can be true." She set down the book in her hands, turned. He was still in the doorway, coat still on, the end of a long day of correspondence and county meetings still on his face. He looked, she thought, like a man who has decided to say something and has stopped rehearsing it. "Stay," he said, "not as Samuel's teacher, not as the woman I respect and am grateful to, as someone I want beside me permanently." He paused. "I am not asking because it is convenient. I am asking because for the first time in 3 years, this house feels like a place where something real is happening. And the reason it feels that way is standing in front of me holding a copy of Thomas Paine." She looked down at the book in her hands, set it on the pile. "You're asking me to trust that what you're telling me is what you mean," she said. "Not what you mean tonight, what you'll mean in 6 months when the county has made a full opinion of it, and the Fredericksburg matter has made the official record, and your name is attached to all of it." "Yes," he said, "that's what I'm asking." "Then I have a question for you first." She met his eyes. "Would you still stand beside me if the whole county called it shame?" He didn't hesitate, not even a breath. "I already have," he said. "And I should have done it sooner." She stood with that for a moment, his words and her father's words, and the weight of 4 years of carrying something alone, and the particular unfamiliar feeling of being seen clearly by someone who has had every reason to look away and has not. "All right," she said. "All right. Yes," she said. "All right." He crossed the room. Then not fast, not dramatic. Just a man closing the distance between himself and something he means. And when he took her hand, it was the way you take a hand when you intend to keep it. Not rescue, not charity, partnership. Outside the schoolhouse window, the last of the summer evening was going gold across the estate fields, and somewhere in the house behind them, Samuel Hawthorne was probably still awake, probably reading past his bedtime, probably calculating something complicated in the margins of his lesson book. And Abigail Reed, who had walked into this house as a seamstress 6 weeks ago with a mended dress and a dead man's ledger, and nothing else she could call her own, stood in the room beside the school her father had never lived to see, and held on. The sign went up on a Thursday morning in October, and Abigail could not look at it directly for the first 10 minutes. Mrs. Bell stood beside her in the yard while two of the estate workers secured the painted board above the schoolhouse door, and she said nothing, which from Mrs. Bell was a form of eloquence. The letters were clean and black and unhurried, the kind of lettering a sign painter does when someone has told him this particular sign matters, and he has decided to believe them. The Jonathan Reed Free School. Samuel appeared at Abigail's left side without announcing himself, the way he moved when he was trying not to make a thing into a production. He looked up at the sign for a long moment, then he said, he'd have liked knowing it was here. "Yes," Abigail said. "He would. Do you think he knows, anyway?" "Somehow." She looked at the sign. At her father's name in clean black letters above a doorway that led to a room full of books and slates and 8 small desks that Nathaniel had commissioned from a carpenter in Fredericksburg, each one sized for a child rather than repurposed from adult furniture. "I think," she said carefully, "that the things a person builds outlast the person. And that's its own kind of knowing." Samuel considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. "That's a good answer," he said. "It's honest without being sad. I've been working on that balance." He took her hand briefly, the quick, unsentimental grip of a boy who has learned that affection doesn't require a ceremony, and then let go and went inside to arrange his books, because today was the first day, and Samuel Hawthorne intended to be prepared. By 9, the yard outside the schoolhouse held more people than Abigail had planned for. She had sent invitations to 14 families. 11 had confirmed. What arrived was closer to 30. Some of the confirmed families had brought neighbors, and some of the neighbors had brought their own children, and word had apparently traveled in the particular efficient way that good news travels through communities that have not had much of it lately. Henry Marsh was there with Clara and their youngest granddaughter, a serious-faced girl of about 9 who had already examined every book on the entry shelf and arranged them by approximate reading difficulty before anyone told her she could touch them. "She'd have done the same thing in any room," Clara said, watching her. "She gets it from Henry. He can't walk into a room without counting what's in it." "That's not a flaw," Abigail said. "That's a skill that hasn't been pointed in the right direction yet." Clara looked at her the way women look at each other when something has been understood correctly. "No," she said quietly. "I suppose it isn't." The thin man who arrived just after 9 was someone Abigail did not immediately recognize. He was elderly, 70s she guessed, with the careful movements of a man whose body had strong opinions about stairs. He was well dressed in an older style, and he came alone, which distinguished him from every other person in the yard. He stood just inside the gate and looked around with the expression of someone who has come to a place they are not entirely sure they have the right to enter. "Mrs. Bell appeared at Abigail's elbow. "Do you know who that is?" she said in the particular low register she used for information she considered significant. "No. His name is Judge Aldous Ferris." A pause. "He was on the circuit court panel in 1815. Abigail went very still. "He was one of the 3 who dismissed your father's complaint, Mrs. Bell said. "He retired from the bench in 1818. He lives in Culpeper now." Another pause. "He did not receive an invitation." Abigail watched the old man standing just inside the gate, turning his hat in his hands with the slow, deliberate motion of someone who has rehearsed coming here, and is now discovering that rehearsal and arrival are not the same thing. She walked across the yard toward him. He saw her approaching, and a subtle shift rippled through his stance. It wasn't a flinch, but a bracing, the posture of a man resigned to dismissal. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of decades spent in courtrooms, a formality that clung to him. "My apologies for the unannounced arrival. I can depart if you wish." "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone direct, devoid of artifice. He reached into his coat, his hands betraying a tremor, as he produced a folded document. "I've been following Dr. Carter's reporting," he stated, "and the evidentiary review." He paused, pressing his lips together. "This has been in my desk for 3 years, Miss Reed. I drafted it after I read the initial examination of your father's ledger. I simply didn't know what to do with it." He held it out. "I know what I should have done with it in 1815. I can't alter that. But I can put it on the record now, if you'll permit me." She took the document, unfolding it. It was a formal recantation, meticulously drafted, legally structured, and intended for the Richmond Circuit Court's record. It stated that the evidence presented by Jonathan Reed in the November 1815 hearing had, in the reviewing judge's considered opinion, been sufficient to warrant a full investigation, and that the dismissal ruling had been an error. At the bottom, bearing the careful signature of a man who had spent a lifetime signing matters of consequence, was Aldous Ferris's name, dated 3 years prior, and for 3 years, relegated to a desk drawer. Abigail read it twice. When she looked up, the old judge was observing her with the expression of a man who had long relinquished hope of absolution, content now to simply do what was right. "It won't undo what happened to him," Ferris said. "No," she replied, "it won't. But it will be formally in the record. His name will be restored as a credible complainant." He hesitated. "It's not enough." "It's not nothing either," she countered. He studied her for a long moment. "You are very much like him, you know, your father." He had that same refusal to be diminished. He lowered his gaze to his hat. I have regretted my vote since the spring of 1816, when I understood Whitaker's true intentions with that land. I told myself regret was sufficient. It wasn't. No, she agreed. It wasn't. But you're here now with something tangible. She met his gaze. Would you like to come in? He blinked. Yes, if you'll have me. My father spent his life believing people were capable of better than they had managed so far, she said. I think he'd want you to see what that belief built. Inside the schoolhouse, Nathaniel found her 20 minutes later. He read her face, a skill honed over time, understanding without a word spoken. Something happened. She handed him the document, watching as he read it, observing the subtle clenching and unclenching of his jaw. Ferris, he said. He came himself. Is he still here? He's speaking with Henry Marsh. She paused. Which is either a disaster or the most opportune conversation in this room, and I choose to believe the latter. Nathaniel looked across the room at the old judge and the old soldier. Two men on opposing sides of the same injustice, now standing in a schoolhouse named for the man caught between them, conversing with the unvarnished sincerity of those who had run out of room for pretense. Your father? Nathaniel said. He built something that outlasted everything Whitaker tried to do to it. That's almost precisely what I told Samuel this morning. Samuel is perceptive. He gets it from somewhere. A faint smile touched the corner of her mouth as she glanced at him. His expression softened, not quite a smile, but a warmth that transcended his usual reserve, a flicker of relief. He had been learning, over these past weeks, to allow his emotions to surface, and she had been learning to decipher their meaning. There are 40 people in this room, he observed. I know. I planned for 14. You're not upset about it? No, she said, surveying the crowded schoolhouse. Clara Marsh's granddaughter sat in the front row, slate in hand. Mrs. Bell was directing two women with a basket of donated primers toward the supply shelf. Samuel was explaining something to a boy his own age, radiating the focused authority of a child who had found his element. I'm truly not. The reading commenced at 11 o'clock, an unplanned event. Samuel had been patiently guiding the younger children through a simple primer, his redirection precise and devoid of condescension, a skill many adults Abigail knew had failed to master. When Ruth, a farm worker's daughter of about 6, tugged his sleeve, confessing her inability to order the letters in her mind, Samuel knelt beside her. Which letters? He asked. She pointed. He looked. Then, without ceremony, he stood and read the entire passage aloud, his finger tracing each word as he spoke, enabling her to follow. The room fell silent, the hush that descends when something profound is happening, something no one wishes to interrupt. He read for 3 minutes. His voice was steady, his breathing even. He looked only at Ruth and the page before her, not at his father, not at Abigail, not at anyone else. He was not performing. He was simply helping a small girl who struggled with the letters, and that was all it was. And that was everything. When he finished, Ruth said, again. With the imperious confidence of a 6-year-old who had discovered a valuable resource, Samuel sat beside her and began anew. Abigail pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth. Nathaniel, standing beside her, remained silent. She heard him exhale a long, quiet breath, like a man finally setting down a burden he had carried at an awkward angle for far too long. 4 months ago, he murmured, low enough only for her to hear. He wouldn't read aloud to anyone, not even me. I know. What did you do? I stopped making it about him, she replied. I made it about the book, and then about the other person listening. When he stopped thinking about whether he could do it, he could do it. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. That's what you did with the breathing exercises too, isn't it? You gave him something to focus on that wasn't the fear. Fear fills up all the space when there's nothing else in the room, she said. Fill the room with something else, and the fear has to make way. He looked at her with an expression she had come to recognize over these months, the one that signaled he was filing something away, not as mere information, but as something he wanted to remember. There was a distinction, and she knew which category this fell into. Reverend Hollis arrived at 11:30, and Abigail felt the atmosphere in the room shift. He was not a man she had found easy to decipher. His sermon after the trial had been the rhetorical equivalent of a man carefully positioned in a doorway, present but uncommitted to either room. She had neither respected nor dismissed it, simply filed it under wait and see. He stood inside the door, surveying the room for a moment, then crossed to Abigail with the directness of a man who had made his decision about which room he occupied. "Miss Reed," he said, "I owe you a plainer statement than I managed from the pulpit. Reverend, I knew your father, not well, but I attended 2 of his school exhibitions before it was closed." He paused. "He was an extraordinary teacher, and I said nothing in his defense when it would have mattered. I am saying something now. It is late, but it is real." She met his steady gaze. "It's real," she agreed. "And it counts." He nodded, a single decisive nod of a man accepting a verdict. "I'll be speaking about this on Sunday, not from the doorway this time. I thought you should know." He moved off toward Henry Marsh, and Abigail stood where she was for a moment, breathing deeply. Beside her, Mrs. Bell appeared, as she always did, efficiently, without announcement, already holding the next task at hand. "The children in the back row need more slates," she said. "And someone has brought an absolutely extraordinary quantity of cornbread that is currently threatening to occupy the entire supply shelf." "Deal with the cornbread as you see fit," Abigail said. "I'll get the slates." "Obviously," Mrs. Bell replied, and moved away. The formal certificate arrived from Richmond by courier at 2 p.m., while the children were still engaged in their lessons. It was addressed to Abigail Reed, and Nathaniel brought it to her himself. She opened it standing in the yard outside the schoolhouse, the October light slanting across the estate, the sound of children's voices drifting through the open door. The Richmond Circuit Court, in light of the formal evidentiary review and the written recantation of Judge Aldous Ferris, had issued a posthumous reversal of the 1,815 dismissal ruling. Jonathan Reed's complaint was entered into the official record as a credible and substantiated claim. His name was cleared. She read it once, folded it, and pressed it against her chest for a moment, not dramatically, but with the quiet weight of a woman, a piece of paper, and 4 years of waiting. Then she unfolded it and read it again. The first time had been for feeling it. The second time was for believing it. Nathaniel waited. He was adept at waiting now, having learned it as he had learned other things about her, by paying attention and adjusting without being asked. "It's done," she said. Yes, he was right. Officially. On the record. Her voice was steady. He was right, and now it's written down where it can't be taken back. "Yes," Nathaniel affirmed. "It is." She looked at the schoolhouse, at the sign, at her father's name in clean black letters, permanent and unhurried above a door currently open to the sound of Samuel reading aloud to a 6-year-old girl who kept asking for more. "I need a minute," she said. "Take all the time you need." She walked to the far end of the yard, to the oak tree she had used as her marker each morning during the breathing exercises. She stood beneath it and cried for about 90 seconds. Fast, fierce, private, the way one cries when something has finally ended that one was not sure would ever end. Then she dried her face, straightened her dress, and walked back, Chippewa Sug. Nathaniel was in the schoolhouse when she returned, conversing with Henry Marsh in the quiet manner of 2 men working out the specifics of something practical. He looked up as she entered, his eyes asking the question without his voice, and she answered with a small nod that conveyed, "I'm all right." "I'm better than all right." He excused himself from Henry Marsh and crossed to her, stopping close enough that only she could hear him. "I have been thinking about the question of timing," he said. "What question?" "The question of when to ask you something I've been building toward for approximately 6 weeks. His voice remained level, but she had learned his tells. The slight forward lean, the particular set of his jaw when he was choosing his words with exceptional care. "I had considered waiting for a more private moment, but I find I am not interested in waiting for things anymore." She looked at him. The schoolhouse around them teemed with people. Children at desks, parents standing along the walls. Mrs. Bell moving among them with the quiet authority of a woman who had decided this place was under her jurisdiction. Samuel was at the front of the room, still reading to Ruth, still patient, still entirely himself. "Ask," she said. "Marry me." Not exactly a question, not quite. It was less a plea and more the final, irrefutable summation of a case he had meticulously constructed over months, now ready to be laid to rest, not out of gratitude, not an attempt to mend what's broken, but because you are the most genuine, the most steadfast, the most utterly vital person I have ever encountered, and I have no desire to navigate the remainder of my days apart from you. Her gaze locked with his. The room hummed around them. The playful cries of children, the whispery scrape of slate pencils. Clara Marsh's low chuckle at some jest from Henry. "In this room," she stated, her voice firm. "You summon me here. My son stands at its forefront. Your father's name graces the lintel. He didn't waver. I can conceive of no finer setting." She held his gaze, taking a single deep breath. Two. Then, yes, she finally conceded. "Here is precisely where we belong." He clasped her hand, much as he had 6 weeks prior, with the quiet, determined intention of holding it forever. And Samuel, who had seemingly sprouted the spatial awareness of a much older soul, looked up from his reading at that very instant. His eyes traced the juncture of their hands, then settled on his father's face, and then on Abigail's. He turned back to Ruth and, with a composure that belied his years, declared, "Let's begin anew," and returned to his book. Ruth echoed his sentiment with profound contentment. Abigail let out a genuine, unbidden laugh that bubbled up from her very core, and for the first time in her presence, Nathaniel laughed too. It transformed his face, erasing the weariness etched by grief and guilt, revealing the man he must have been before life had taken its toll. Mrs. Bell, passing with a stack of primers, cast a single glance at them both and, without missing a beat, remarked, "About time," and continued on her way. The evening's gathering at Hawthorne Hall bore no resemblance to the stiff political supper that had ignited it all. Gone were the brandy-fueled pronouncements and polished speeches, the men jockeying for position, the discreet presence of servants hovering in the periphery. The table in the main hall had been extended to its full length, a decision spearheaded by Nathaniel, though he had consulted Abigail first, as consulting her had become his ingrained habit. Her response, as always, was direct and unvarnished. Around that table sat the Marsh family, the Carter family, and 3 other families whose land claims were meticulously documented in her father's ledger. Added to their number were 2 families from the county who had simply inquired if they might attend, and had been warmly welcomed. Reverend Hollis was present, seated between Clara Marsh and Dr. Carter. By the meal's end, he seemed engaged in genuine discourse with both, a sight Abigail chose to interpret as evidence of humanity's inherent capacity for goodness, a capacity they had, until now, failed to fully realize. Judge Ferris, however, had departed after the morning session. Nathaniel had bid him farewell with a handshake that conveyed more than words could express, and a quiet moment with Abigail at the schoolhouse door, a moment she would never recount, for it was not hers to share. Samuel, seated at the table, consumed a hearty meal and conversed more freely than he ever had in a social setting. At one point, he gently corrected Henry Marsh's calculation on a land measurement, his apology tinged with the quiet conviction of a boy unwilling to let an error stand. Henry Marsh, chuckling, declared, "Boy, you'll be a force to be reckoned with on the bench someday." Samuel, with unwavering earnestness, replied, "Yes, sir, that is my intention." He didn't appear immodest, it was simply a statement of fact. Near the evening's close, Nathaniel rose, announcing he had an important piece of news. A hush fell over the gathering. He stated, plainly, without preamble or flourish, that they were to be married. It was the announcement of a decision made by 2 souls who knew their own hearts. He declared that Abigail Reed would remain at Hawthorne Hall as his wife, that the Jonathan Reed Free School would continue under her dedicated guidance, and that any member of the county harboring objections was welcome to present them directly to him, for he was done conducting his affairs at arm's length from what truly mattered. From her vantage point at the far end of the table, Mrs. Bell raised her water glass. For Mrs. Bell, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Clara Marsh exclaimed, "Well, finally." It was a sentiment remarkably similar to Mrs. Bell's earlier pronouncement, and the two women exchanged a knowing glance across the table, their eyes reflecting the mutual respect of those who had independently arrived at the same undeniable truth. Henry Marsh shook Nathaniel's hand, then turned to Abigail, his voice warm with emotion. "Your father would have been beside himself with pride." "I know," she replied, her voice steady, managing to hold back the tears. Later, after the guests had departed and Samuel was tucked away in bed, the house settling into its nocturnal quiet, Abigail stood alone in the schoolhouse for a few moments. In one hand, she held her father's last letter. In the other, the Richmond certificate. She had carried both since morning, moving between them as one moves between two essential anchors, two truths. She gazed at her father's name above the door, visible through the window from within, dark, bold letters against darker wood, a symbol of unwavering certainty. She recalled the night 6 weeks prior, when her heart had pounded in her throat as she had raced across a polished floor, flinging herself into the arms of a boy she barely knew, in a house where she had no right to be seen, simply because looking at his face had compelled her to act. She reflected on every choice made between that night and this one, every moment she had chosen to stay. Every moment Nathaniel had chosen to stand by her side, every moment Samuel had chosen to speak up, to defend Carter, to champion Ferris, to finally act, to hold on to a letter for years because a schoolmaster had entrusted it to him. She placed both papers on the nearest desk, Ruth's desk, the one at the front, still bearing faint traces of chalk dust. She looked at them side by side, her father's words and the state's words, finally telling the same singular story. Outside, the October night was crisp and clear, a canvas of stars. And inside, in a schoolhouse bearing her father's name above the door, Abigail Reed stood at the forefront of a room she would fill with children's voices come morning. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer small. She was no longer alone. In a world that had dictated she remain on the periphery, mending the damage wrought by powerful men, she had stepped into the heart of the room and refused to yield. In doing so, she had not only reshaped her own destiny, but had fundamentally altered the contours of everything around her. Some are born into power, some acquire it through wealth, lineage, or inheritance. And some, the truly rare, the absolutely essential, forge it from nothing but an unwavering refusal to be extinguished, day by day, until the edifice they were constructing stands revealed in its true and enduring glory. Abigail Reed was that kind of person, and from that night forward, Hawthorne Hall would bear her name in every significant space, not emblazoned above a doorway, but etched into the very lives of every child who learned within its embrace. That courage has no address, no bloodline, and no price. And that a woman, clad in a mended dress, who refuses to remain silent, can, in fact, alter the destiny of an entire household.